Picture this, a Roman racetrack in Jordan, not the thunder of chariots, but silence, and beneath the sand, 230 bodies stacked like cordwood. This isn't a battlefield. It isn't a massacre site. It's a plague pit, the first one ever confirmed from what historians call the world's first pandemic. And what these bones tell us, what the DNA locked inside them reveals, is about to rewrite everything we thought we knew about the fall of the ancient world. The year is 541 CE. The Byzantine Empire is at its peak. Emperor Justinian has nearly restored Rome's glory, his armies reclaiming Italy, North Africa, southern Spain. Constantinople is the richest city on earth. Trade ships from India, Egypt, and Persia crowd its harbors, and then something arrives on those ships. Rats, fleas, and inside those fleas, a bacterium that would kill more people than any war in human history, Yersinia pestis, the plague. For 15 centuries, we knew the Plague of Justinian mainly from written accounts, terrified chroniclers describing cities emptied overnight. But no mass grave, no bodies. Until now. Jerash, the Romans called it Gerasa, sits in what is now northern Jordan. In the 6th century, it was a thriving trading city of roughly 20,000 people. Caravans passed through carrying silk, spices, and perfumes. It sat at the crossroads of empires, a place where cultures mixed, languages blended, fortunes were made. Like all Roman cities, Jerash had a hippodrome, a massive racetrack where crowds gathered to watch chariot races. Entertainment, community, spectacle. But by the 6th century, the races had stopped. The hippodrome had been converted into something more practical, a ceramics factory. Potters worked where chariots once thundered. That's where archaeologists from the University of South Florida found them. Not on the track itself, but in 2 chambers beneath the stands. Storage rooms probably, until they became something else. 230 individuals, roughly 150 adults and 80 children, stacked in layers with little care for the burial customs that Romans held sacred. In Roman tradition, the dead were mourned, washed, dressed in their finest clothes. Coins were placed on their eyes. Prayers were spoken. Feasts were held. None of that happened here. These bodies were deposited rapidly, over just days or weeks, stacked directly on pottery debris. The researchers' words, little attention to standard funerary customs. But here's what makes this discovery different from any other ancient burial. It's not the number of bodies. It's not the location. It's the DNA. Every single body tested positive for Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes bubonic plague, the same pathogen that would later cause the Black Death. And here's the detail that stunned the researchers. All the genomes belong to a single, uniform strain. These people didn't die over years or decades. They died together, in one outbreak. This is the first biomolecularly verified mass grave from what epidemiologists call the first pandemic. The first hard proof of mass death from the Plague of Justinian. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what the Plague of Justinian actually was, and how little we've truly known about it until now. It began in 541 CE, probably in Egypt. Some historians think it originated in Central Africa. Others point to the steppes of Central Asia. The truth is, we don't know for certain. What we do know, by 542, it had reached Constantinople, and when it hit the imperial capital, the death toll was staggering. At its peak, 5,000 people dying every single day. Emperor Justinian himself caught the plague. He survived, one of the lucky ones. But his plans for reconquest, his dream of restoring Rome, those died with his soldiers and his tax base. The plague didn't just kill people. It collapsed economies. Trade networks that had connected the Mediterranean for centuries simply stopped. Ships sat empty in harbors. Caravans didn't arrive. Over the next 2 centuries, the plague returned again and again, at least 18 documented waves. The last recorded outbreak was in 750 CE, 200 years of recurring death. Total death toll? Estimates range wildly from 25 million to as many as 100 million people over 2 centuries. We simply don't have the records to know precisely. Historians have long debated just how devastating the first pandemic really was. Some argue it ended the ancient world, that the Byzantine Empire never truly recovered. Others, like Oklahoma State historian Merle Eisenberg, argue the effects were uneven. Some cities devastated, others barely touched. Not the civilization-ending event some claim. The problem has always been evidence. Written accounts describe horror, but writers exaggerate. They use literary conventions. They copy from earlier plague descriptions. How do you separate fact from rhetoric? That's why Jerash matters so much. This isn't a chronicle written decades later. This isn't poetry or propaganda. These are bodies, real people. And their DNA doesn't lie. The Jerash grave confirms what some historians suspected but couldn't prove. At least one city experienced catastrophic mortality. Not gradual decline, not a minor outbreak. Catastrophe. About half of Jerash's population, roughly 10,000 people out of 20,000, died during the outbreak. Half, in a matter of weeks. The researchers noted something else remarkable. Isotopic analysis of the bones showed these weren't all locals. They came from varied geographic backgrounds, different water sources, different diets. Jerash was exactly what historians thought, a cosmopolitan trading hub. A socially and geographically mixed urban population. People from across the ancient world living side by side and dying together. The same trade routes that made Jerash prosperous, that brought silk and spices and ideas from the far corners of the known world, also brought the pathogen that killed them. There's something haunting about that. The very thing that made their city great, its openness, its connections, became the vector for its destruction. And it's not just Jerash. This discovery changes how we interpret evidence across the entire Mediterranean. Abandoned cities, depopulated farmland, economic collapse that historians have attributed to war or politics. The research team put it simply, this finding changes perceptions about the first pandemic by providing direct evidence of large-scale human mortality. Not speculation, evidence. So what does this discovery actually tell us, beyond confirming that a terrible thing happened in one particular city? Why should we care 15 centuries later? First, consider how pandemic response challenges repeat across history. Rapid burial, overwhelmed infrastructure, trade networks collapsing. These aren't modern problems, they're human problems. Anyone who lives through COVID-19 will recognize the patterns, the impossible choices, the abandonment of normal rituals, the way disease exposes the cracks in any society. Second, this work shows what modern science can extract from ancient evidence, DNA sequencing. Isotopic analysis, techniques that didn't exist a generation ago are rewriting ancient history. 20 years ago, proving a skeleton died of plague required guessing based on burial context. Now we can identify the exact pathogen, even determine the specific strain. That means countless sites dismissed as cause unknown might yield answers. Plague mass graves could be hiding under medieval churches, Roman forts, even parking lots. Third, and this might be the most important point, pandemics don't just kill, they transform. They reshape societies in ways that outlast the disease itself. The Jerash hippodrome tells that story perfectly. A space built for entertainment became a factory. Then, the factory became a morgue. Each transformation reflecting a society under pressure. After the plague, Jerash never recovered. The population dropped. Buildings fell into disrepair. The bustling trade city became a quiet backwater. Within a few centuries, it was abandoned entirely. The same pattern repeated across the Mediterranean. Cities shrank. Rural areas depopulated. The tax base that funded Byzantine armies and building projects simply evaporated. Some historians argue this is why Justinian's reconquest ultimately failed, not because the Byzantines lost battles, but because they ran out of soldiers, workers, and money. Plague economics. If stories like this resonate with you, the way archaeology rewrites what we thought we knew, consider subscribing. We dig into histories like this every week. What makes the Jerash discovery so powerful is its specificity. These aren't anonymous victims. Through isotope analysis, researchers can reconstruct individual life stories. This person grew up drinking water from the local springs. That one came from somewhere else. Maybe a merchant, maybe a migrant worker, maybe a refugee from another plague-struck region. The children buried alongside adults tell their own story. Entire families died together. Parents couldn't save their children. Children couldn't save their parents. 80 children out of 230 bodies. That's more than a third. Whatever took them indiscriminately. And here's a detail that stops you cold. The ceramics they were buried on. Broken pottery from the factory. The workers' last products became their burial bed. Think about that. One day you're making pots, throwing clay, firing kilns. The next, you're being carried to a pit beneath the hippodrome where you used to watch races. If you're interested in exploring this further, the University of South Florida study is published and available. The primary sources reveal details we couldn't cover here. You might also consider how archaeological DNA analysis is revolutionizing multiple fields, not just plague studies, cancer, migration patterns, ancient diets. The techniques apply broadly. The Plague of Justinian lasted 2 centuries, but its effects, demographic, economic, cultural, may have persisted far longer. Some argue you can trace them into the medieval period. The rise of Islam occurred just decades after the last major plague wave. Some historians ask whether a weakened Byzantine empire, depopulated, impoverished, was easier to conquer. Others push back against such grand narratives. History rarely has single causes. Empires fall for complex reasons, but disease, mass disease, clearly plays a role. And that's perhaps the most important lesson Jerash offers. Not the specific death toll, not the genetic confirmation, but the reminder that pandemics shape worlds. They don't just add numbers to mortality statistics, they reroute civilizations. They determine which empires rise and which ones fade. They select, brutally, who survives to build the future. 230 bodies in a Roman racetrack. That's all that's left of them. No names, no individual graves, just bones. And the DNA those bones preserved. 15 centuries ago, someone carried their neighbor's body down those steps, laid them on broken pottery, probably said a hasty prayer, if there was time, then went back for the next one. That person might have died the next day, or the day after. The plague wasn't selective. It took rich and poor, young and old, the healthy and the sick. The Plague of Justinian ended in 750 CE, but it didn't vanish. Yersinia pestis retreated into rodent populations, into soil, into waiting. 600 years later, it would return as the Black Death. Same bacterium, same devastation. And between those pandemics and our own era, the same questions. How do we prepare? How do we respond? How do we repair? 230 people answered those questions with their lives. Now, 15 centuries later, their bones are finally telling us what they couldn't. And we do well to listen.